Hello everybody, my name is CraigBennettII, and today I'm going to get into a Microsoft Flight Simulator video. This particular video, we're going to get into takeoffs and cruise altitude. Now, this is a fairly important thing to realize whenever you want to fly around, whether it's in the game or in the real world, because takeoffs, understanding how high you need to have yourself set and how to do it correctly on certain places, it can actually make you have a very nice trip or a very bad one. So with that one in mind, within the simulation itself, once you get your waypoint set up, if we go to Navlog, we can actually see what it wants us to do. So for this case, it originally wanted me to go about to 2,300 feet in the air and then hit cruise and then descend after a little bit. And this is all fine and all, but the problem with this is that we don't really have much of a cruise there. And in the real world, also same thing in the game, for short distance flights, the bulk of your fuel is going to be used up in the actual ascent part of it. Descent pretty much uses almost no fuel in itself because gravity's taken over at that point. But in a cruise, you're not really using much fuel into that unless you're going very, very long distance. But as far as the ascent part of it, going up into a given altitude, that is the bulk amount of your actual stuff. One thing that I will want to note here that's fairly important is you need to realize what plane you're using and how realistic you want things. Unfortunately, in this, there is no hapatia into the game. Basically, in the real world, if you have a depressurized airplane, which is the bulk of the smaller airplanes, then you need to carry around an oxygen tank with you when you hit a certain altitude. You just breathe in the oxygen tank, and that keeps you safe. Whereas if you don't want to do that and don't really care to go down that road, then you can only go up to a certain altitude. Now, in the United States, I'm not really sure about other places, but in the United States, legally you're not supposed to fly above 12,000 something feet, so let's say 12,000 and a half feet up in the air without an oxygen tank. That's very, very important to note. And realistically, you probably don't want to get anywhere above 8 to, like the closer to 10, you're getting a little bit iffy in my books. So you kind of want to stay below a certain rate because it's just better off for everybody. So this next tip really is useful for both landing and takeoff. And you may notice that there's numbers on some of these runways. So for example, we got runway 4 here and runway 22 here. What does those actual numbers mean, and how can that help you when figuring out the heading and figuring out which runway you want to take off from when you're dealing with smaller airports or some of this other stuff? And basically, if we go to a compass, you'll notice on some compass there's a bunch of numbers all the way around. A compass is a circle. Circle is 360 degrees. Congratulations, figure out what his numbers mean. So basically with the runways, if we take a look at the thing, it says runway 4, and what that means is 40 degrees to 49 degrees. And if it's runway 22, then it's 220 degrees, because it's 22, it looks at the first number, so 22 through 229 degrees. So you can probably see a pattern here. Basically, if it's 32, then it's anywhere from the 320 degrees to 329 degrees. Runway 30, it's 300 degrees versus 309 degrees. It's very simple like that. So basically, if there is no second number, then then it's below 100. and you can just basically line your plane up somewhere within that. So if you notice between the here or facing north, so if we're about either 40 degrees or 49 degrees, then we should be actual line up with the runway enough to be able to see it and whatnot, and be able to make whatever correction to go from there. So that's fairly important to itself. Now, what about something like this, where it wants you ATC, or you set your thing to take off at a given runway, so in this case runway 5. What does that actually mean? Well, the thing is as we mentioned before, we're dealing with a circle, and the north is 0, and which is 360 mark, and basically for this we're looking at somewhere around 50 degrees to 59 degrees facing out, and from this end, and basically we're going to just be taking off from there and going from there. So I mean, it's very simple when it comes to that. So just basically take a quick look at a compass if you get confused, and figure out, okay, so the runway 5 is somewhere between 50 degrees and 59 degrees, and you can figure out, is this going to be easier for you to get to your actual needed heading in order to go to the place you need to go. So last little bit of information with a short video to help understand is, if we take a look at these numbers right here, this actually shows you the wind speed and the direction. So if we take a look again at the compass, we can actually see 241 degrees, so we know the general direction the wind's going. Great. How does this apply to you when taking off or landing? Well, when taking off, the most pilots, you can use a tailwind, and but most pilots prefer to use headwinds. Now, what is a tailwind versus a headwind? Let's just say that this is you, that this crappy drawing of a plane is you. So a headwind is basically where the front of the plane is facing the wind. Basically, you got the wind going against the front of the plane. A tailwind is basically where it's coming from behind the plane. Now, why would a pilot prefer headwinds for takeoff? Well, a headwind is basically, if you take a look at the wings on an aircraft, it's a crudely drawn one, the headwind will actually help it climb. So as the the headwind is going against it, it'll go on her and it'll help push it upwards. I actually have a short video showing this. So if you see here, you can actually see the plane is actually going, and it's just sitting there, no engine going, and there is a headwind, and because the plane's not tied down, it's actually going to take off in a few seconds. And this means that if the plane it has a strong enough headwind, it needs 0 runway at all. It can, I mean, at this point, the plane's going to do what it's going to do. But assuming that you got enough forward momentum, if a pilot's in there and able to correct things and do whatever they need to do, then they can take off from that point. I mean, it wouldn't be advisable to do something like this, but it is possible if you get a strong enough headwind. And that's just fairly important to note, because if you take a look at this, we can actually get up into altitude much quicker, save time, save gas, cost of gas and whatnot, and to do what we need to do. So what about landing? This is fairly important. Most pilots, and keep in mind, you can take off in a tailwind, so don't worry about that. If the runway is really short, then in the real world, some runways will actually make it a hard limit saying that you cannot take off in a tailwind. So that should be noted, but a lot of airports around the world, you can go either way on that. It's because there's enough runway for most planes out there. But what about landing? Should you land in the headwind or a tailwind? And most will say land in a headwind. Why do that versus a tailwind? Because, if headwind creates lift, then wouldn't it be better to go with a tailwind, which doesn't? And that might even push the aircraft a little further. Well, the reason why you don't want to do a tailwind is you increase your chances of an accident. Because you're landing with a tailwind, you have a higher ground speed on touchdown. And this in itself can actually cause problems into controlling the actual aircraft itself. Whereas with a headwind, you have lower speeds when you're actually landing. In this case, not by much, but still, it's helping by a little bit, and that way you're able to control it a lot better. Now you might say, well, 4 knots is not a lot, whatever. I'm going to tell you, just look around and you'll find that there is tailwind accidents where people landed with tailwind in 5 knots, 7 knots, like a lot of accidents. And there tends to be like a general cutoff on a lot of people. Personal is 10 knots tends to be the cutoff for most. So that's something to note. It's just that it helps by a lot if you just go with a headwind and landing. If you can. If you can't, then, do what you have to do. So if you see my prior videos, you know what lines on the ground mean, and stop at the particular lines as indicated in the taxi video. Haven't seen that, don't know what I'm talking about, check out that video. Links down below, simple little plug to myself. But anyways, before you take off, look to your left and right type of situation. Always keep situational awareness, keep looking left and right type of situation, as if you're coming out of a parking lot or a parking space in a parking lot or something like that. And stay center of the yellow line as much as possible. When you get on the runway, stay in the center and never ever ever stop on the runway. The runway is the most dangerous place when it comes to an airport, and the reason why you look left and right, same way as you don't stop, is accidents. So from here, you stay in the center as much as possible, because if the wind pushes you or something, you can correct normally in enough time. Now, in this, I had a rough takeoff, but any takeoff that doesn't really end with a crash or a landing, unexpected landing, is a good takeoff. At this point, I'm looking at gauges, and if I pause it and show you, the first and biggest thing, and by the way, I'll leave a link down below to a wiki article showing all these gadgets, but the first and biggest thing I look at is this. And how this works is basically as your plane goes up, it indicates on this. This is basically a simple indication to see how much you're banking, you're going up or going down. Depending on the actual model, it might have numbers. The ticks might be further away to each other, closer to each other. So that's something to note. But like if we take a look at this particular model, we can see like a 5, 10, 15, whatever, and this is in degrees. If you want to start messing with the trim wheel, before you take off, you really do need to know where the trim wheel is. In a simulator, it can be a little bit difficult to actually go and see the trim wheel depending on the plane. There are certain planes that's almost impossible to control the trim wheel and control the plane at the same time. Given that it's in a simulator, in real life it's far easier because you have immediate access to it. So keep that in mind, but you want to start playing the trim wheel at this point. And This is a pretty good picture of one. Basically, as it goes down, it helps push the nose up. As it goes up, it pushes the nose down. Reason why pilots use this is if they pull back on this constantly, then small things like the yoke slipping out of her hand or something like that, it can cause massive problems. And plus, on top of that, you deal with fatigue and a few other things. And it's better to use a trim wheel when possible. And that way, the plane itself, you don't have to worry about pulling back the entire time or pushing forward or doing whatever. The plane will more than less keep itself level. Now, as far as the next thing that I'm looking at immediately, like I'm not even at cruising altitude yet. The next thing I'm looking at is the heading. And last I looked at the altimeter, and this just basically shows you how high you're going. Now, you might note a knob on yours, depending on it. It might be on the left, might be the right. It might be digital, it might be whatever. And all this does is this allows you to change the actual thing to basically fine-tune it. I highly recommend calling into anywhere to do a flight check to get a reading, and from that you want to use that reading to change this in order to basically be able to make sure that you're at the right height, because a little bit of change means that you're 300 feet below or above what you're really supposed to be. After that point, I try to use markers along the ground that, just from studying the map and stuff, like highways and stuff like that, and follow them when I can. And it's a lot easier to follow these markers than to actually just follow your gauges. Notes that obviously highways and stuff turn left and right, all the other stuff. So you keep an eye on your gauges, but because you're dealing with something large like a highway, it's a lot easier just to follow it as much as you can. But keep in mind that if it takes you too far off one way or another, it could be that much more difficult finding your destination. One big thing I will mention is use handheld GPS. It's like if you're flying in real life and doing whatever. Believe it or not, GPSs are actually encouraged by the FAA for even a visual flights rules. The reason for this is they don't want people going too far off one way or another. Because unlike a car or a truck, where you're staying on the road or you're going to be going through a tree or something weird and the truck ain't moving, a plane can go over a lot of land and you can get lost fairly easily, and you only got so much fuel. So having a GPS where you can actually see, I'm actually a little bit far off than what I need to be. So use that when you can. It's not cheating per se, because chances are what's going to end up happening, even on a plane like what you're seeing here, you're probably going to have a phone, and it could be they have a mount or a second person or something like that, or a strap that you put. A lot of pilots do this, in fact, is a knee strap. Is basically you strap the phone or strap the and I'll get a little bit more into this when we get into radio communications, but you strap a pad or something like that, but you strap a phone to your leg, and that way you just look down 2-3 seconds, figure out where you are, and that way you see if you're lined up where you need to be going or not, and just go from there. So note that with how modern technology is, everybody pretty much has a phone, and every phone has a GPS. At least the smartphone has GPS. Fact is there's just no reason not to use it when you have access to it. Notes that heavy reliance on it is not a good thing, because unless if it's an actual GPS, internet signal and stuff like that from your cell phone provider might go out at times and might screw you pretty badly. So note that. But what you want to do is just basically note that you have these tools, use these tools when available, and even in game, use the nav equipment when available if you feel like you need it. Anyways, after this point, it's fairly simple. You just basically monitor your speeds and whatnot, your heading once in a while. If you got autopilot working for you, use it at this point. I'm going to get into an entire video on autopilot itself. Feel free to check that out whenever it comes out if it's not already out. But also let me know what you want to be covered in the future. But if this is helped you out, just leave a like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next video. And I hope you have a great day.